I finally learned how to say no without feeling guilty, and you can too. This is Daisy. Say hi. No. No. See, not so hard to say no. Easy when you're talking to a dog and their affection is constant. And in today's video, we're going to talk about how I shifted from saying yes to saying no. Let me go put her out. I'll be right back. I went from being worried about what people thought and having too much on my plate, being overwhelmed, to feeling in control and being proud of my contributions. Going from having okay relationships to being respected, and ultimately finally being able to work on the things that I wanted to and avoiding the things, or getting out of working on the things that I didn't want to, mostly. It's easier than you think, and I'll cover my personal transformation in 3 parts. First, the value of saying no. Second, the 3-step process I follow. I do it via autopilot now, but for this video, I went back through and thought about the exact steps that I use, and I realized that I do the same thing every single time. And third, exact phrases that I use for different scenarios at work that you can modify for both your work and your personal life, because let's face it, saying no isn't just something that occurs at work. We have to do that in our personal lives as well. Okay, and you should know this change is not going to happen overnight. This was a change that I decided to make because I felt that my personal boundaries were out of control and I was feeling overwhelmed. And once I started down this path of I'm going to take it seriously and learn how to say no and control how I show up and what I work on and what I contribute to the world, it took several months, and then I started doing it without even thinking about it. So when you try it at first, it's going to feel very awkward, but you will eventually get used to it and it'll become very second nature for you. So don't think that this is simple and easy, yes, but it's not an overnight fix where you're going to watch this video and tomorrow you're going to be perfect at saying no. You're going to have a little bit of trial and error, but I am so glad that I didn't waste another moment putting off learning this skill when I first decided that it was something worth doing. I also started enjoying work more once I put this in place, and now I've been using it for over a decade and I'm constantly refining it. So let's get into part 1. I want to talk about why saying no is beneficial. And the most important thing, if you take nothing else away from this video, the most important thing is that every time you say no, you are saying yes to what's important to you. And if you can get that embedded in your brain, everything else will just sort of flow from there. So by saying no to something that you don't want to do, or that you don't want, or that isn't of benefit to a bigger plan or vision that you have, the company has, your family has, you are essentially saying yes to keep going on the vision and the path that you're on. The second thing that's important to know is companies are notoriously bad at prioritization. Companies are made up of people, and people are also notoriously bad at prioritization. So whether you want to call that a chicken and egg situation or not, saying no forces prioritization. It forces a conversation about whether or not we're working on the most important things that we should be working on and spending our time on. And third, protect your boundaries. You do have to know what your boundaries are before you can protect them, but once you know what your boundaries are, what you're willing to say yes to and what you're willing to say no to, saying no becomes an exercise of protecting your boundaries. And that's really important. I'm going to pause there and we're going to get into part 2, and I'll try to make it a little bit more clear by going into examples on each of these. By the way, before we get into part 2, lots of people ask me how to get unstuck in their career, and I've created a guide for that, which I have on my website at erintran.com, and this is what it looks like. And it's 9 pages, how to get unstuck in your career. It's 5 things you should stop doing. So hopefully that frees up a little bit of your time, and feel free to grab a copy. And if it's not relevant for you, let's keep moving. Part 2. All right, I have a 3-step process that I follow, and I do this unconsciously now, but having this framework in mind as you embark on this journey of saying no might be really helpful. Number 1, you want to set the stage. Number 2, you want to start with questions. And number 3, you want to get alignment. So let's break down what each of these means. Step 1, set the stage. You want to foster an outcome-based conversation, not an output-based conversation. So an outcome is what the end result is going to be. And it's it's something that will shift the needle in some direction based on whatever it is that you're working on. The output are all of the things, all of the work that you do. So whether you are producing a product and it's a physical product or the digital product, whether you are working on specs or writing code or looking at finances, does not matter. But all of those are outputs. The outcome is the measurable impact it's going to have on the company's sales, on the world at large, that sort of thing. So if you start by setting the stage to have an outcome-focused conversation, now the conversation is going to revolve around the thing that you're being asked to do that you basically kind of want to say no to, is focused on that bigger outcome, because then it becomes a non-personal conversation and you align yourself with the other person that's asking you to do it on saying, let's think through this together. Are we working on, is this really going to help that outcome, versus getting into the nuances of output. The second thing that you want to do in the process is start with questions. So whenever you get asked to do something, in general, unless the ask is super, super simple, you're probably going to want to ask clarifying questions. Your gut reaction might be, I want to say no. But before you think about how you want to say no or why you want to say no, you want to ask questions. And the key to asking questions in this step or at this stage is coming from a place of genuine curiosity. So if you are asked to do something and you don't have time on your plate, your gut reaction might be to say no because you don't have time on your plate. But the reality is maybe you're doing some things that you shouldn't be doing or that are not as high of value, or actually, if given the choice to take something else off your plate, you'd rather be doing this thing instead. Or you might be hearing in some of your questions that this item that you're being asked to do is actually quite important. You'd like to be the one to do it, but it puts too much on your plate, or that means saying no to going back to somebody else and trying to get something taken off your plate. So if you start with questions from a place of genuine curiosity, the goal might be to either come to alignment about a path forward, or get them to retract the request because they have seen the light, if you will. Your goal when asking the questions is twofold. One, to stay focused on the outcome. Second, to determine whether or not that item should be on your plate in place of something else, in addition to, or if there is, say, a timing issue, or maybe it shouldn't be on your plate at all. But you want to get the other person to help kind of solve the how much is on your plate and what are you working on when you're working on a problem with you, as an ally rather than an adversary. For starters, I love when somebody asks me to do something to use this very simple phrase, tell me more. And so if somebody says, hey, can you work on this? I say, sure, tell me more about that. My sure is not a sure, I will work on it. It's an acknowledgement phrase that sounds very agreeable, so that when I say tell me more, and I'm coming from a place of genuine curiosity, sure, tell me more says I'm open and receptive to listening. I'd really like to understand. And the reason this is important is maybe the thing that they're asking should actually be the most important thing on your plate. And now it's a matter of what else comes off your plate so that you can work and focus and turn your attention to that. And then there's a secondary question that I love to ask. How does this get us to a better outcome than what we're already working on? And you may then have to include a faster, cheaper, better. So how does this get us to the outcome faster? How does this get us to the outcome cheaper, et cetera, et cetera? But the baseline thinking is, how does this contribute toward the outcome? And again, that reinforces that this is an outcome-based dialogue or conversation or thinking through from an ally perspective, rather than a yes, I'll do it, no, I won't, what's gonna kind of happen if I say yes or no. So you're actually changing the tone and timbre and elevating the conversation to an entirely different level, and it's no longer contentious. It's thoughtful, it's curious, it's forward thinking. By staying focused on the implications to the outcome, you create for yourself a personal brand of someone who is thinking about the bigger picture, the longer term, and not the freneticism and hurry and time constraints of the current moment. And that is actually one of the secrets to whether somebody is capable of being a leader or kind of getting promoted. So keep that in mind. It's totally an aside from this, but keep that in mind when you are looking around you and seeing which people are merely taking on work and which people are fostering these types of conversations. conversations because it kind of separates those two categories of people. Look out for red flags on this question and kind of understanding thing, because if the conversation turns into an output-based conversation, the person that you are talking to, if you can't steer them away from an output-based conversation and back to an outcome-based conversation, you may want to consider whether or not they're the right person to be having this conversation with. So unfortunately, if it's your manager, it's not a lot you can do about it, but I would suggest in a scenario like that to circle around and try to schedule just a coffee chat or some one-on-one time, or just like go for a walk for 10 minutes with them if you're in the same office, to step back from the immediate and have a more general conversation with them and say, listen, I would really love to, you're going to have to obviously open it up, but somewhere in the conversation, some phrase like, I would really love to have a conversation with you about looking at my work through an outcome focused lens and giving me the agency being control to determine how I go about getting to those outcomes, rather than getting assigned very discrete items that are purely output based. The change will give you a lot greater sense of control, which actually results in a great deal of work satisfaction, regardless of whatever chaos and storm is going on around you at work. And number two, it actually, unless you have a terrible boss or manager or leader that you're working for, which get out of that as fast as possible if that's the case, but they will actually treasure and appreciate that you are taking an outcome and not an output-based approach. Step 3 is getting to agreement. And what your entire goal in this conversation is getting to agreement on whether or not that is the important thing that you should be working on. And if the answer is actually yes, you also want to make sure that within that agreement that there is a sub-activity to take something off your plate. And taking it off your plate may mean delaying when you're working on it. It may mean giving it to somebody else. It may mean putting it on hold until the foreseeable future. But you want to be careful in making sure that getting to agreement on that thing doesn't ultimately end up adding to your plate if your plate is genuinely full, but to have a more holistic conversation about, yep, I can see the point. I can see why that's outcome based. I can see why it's a priority. So I would suggest taking X off my plate for right now, or deferring that. Can we put that on hold so that I can prioritize this? And that is a clear way of having an adult conversation about organizing what's on your plate in the here and now. Let's get into some really specific phrases that I use. So there are times when it's not that complicated and it's a clear no, and you just need the right phrase so that you don't sound like a jerk. And not sounding like a jerk starts with protecting your yes, saying no to protect your yes. I like to use indirect phrasing that's also really clear. So for example, sure, I would be able to work on X after I finish Y. Would that timing work for you? This is a way of not having it be contentious. You're not going into problem-solving mode in an allyship sort of way, but what you are doing is you're saying, my plate is full. I'm happy to support this. Is this timing okay? And now timing becomes the enemy and it's not contentious between you and the requester. Another way of saying that is, I'm not sure I'll have time in the near future unless there's been a prioritization change that I need to be aware of and I can push back some other work. What do you think? Again, these are phrases that I use. Please modify them for your environment and both your work environment and the context that you're in. But phrasing like that says, my plate is full. I'm not telling you no, but there's some things we need to sort out. I can't just pile one more thing on. Very often, this will actually turn into a conversation about prioritization and staggering. So again, these are phrases that are good to use when you don't need to follow the 3-step process entirely. It's clear that it needs to get done. It's just a matter of timing and reorganizing your plate. The last thing any manager or leader wants is to be caught off guard. They asked you to work on something, you said yes, you deferred something else that was actually more important, and now shit hits the fan. Another approach is to acknowledge and push on non-alignment. So if those first 2 phrases were around timing and prioritization, you can also take an approach of non-alignment. And here's what that looks like. And this is particularly valuable when it is somebody from another team, whether it is a peer to you or a manager in another team. You can say something like, I can see how that's really important to the work you're doing. And then you can follow it up with, unless there is a way to tie it into the outcomes I hit, I'm going to have to pass on adding that to my workload for right now. So you're being really clear in saying that you cannot take this on because it's not tied to the outcomes. Again, we're back to outcomes-based conversation, so it's going to force prioritization. So if this is a peer to you in another department, they'll probably go back to their manager. If it's a manager in another department, they can take it up with your manager, and then you can figure out prioritization. But it is a way of saying, like, listen, it's not that I want to be unhelpful or uncooperative, but I have my priorities. I can see how that's a priority for you. And right now I'm having trouble aligning those things. If the person kind of stops cold and is like, oh, okay, then fine. Or they may push, and then you go back to the 3-step process because they're trying to create an allyship with you and work with like where and how that's important and needs to be prioritized in which case, another phrase that you could use if you kind of do reach an alignment, you can say like, now I can see where this is important. My plate is still full. Let me go and check with my manager, my leader, or so-and-so and see if I can shift some things around to reprioritize this into the right now. So any of those phrases are all things that you can latch on to given the situation. So feel free at any point in time to go back and listen to some of these phrases in the video or bookmark it so that you can grab them, or take a few minutes after you watch this video to just like jot down or think about what is the language that I might use that sounds natural to me, to my work environment, to the work that I do, and kind of the culture of my company that would actually be parallel to this and be just as effective, so that I am focused on outcomes and not overloading myself. None of these phrases in a good, healthy work environment where a company is truly trying to get to outcomes. There is no leader in any scenario in a high quality company that wants you to work on stuff just for the sake of working on stuff. And if it's not going to move the needle, they'd rather have you be smart enough to tell them to take it off your plate. When it comes to these types of things, you're only going to be seen as a jerk if you frame it in the ways that I've gone through in this video, if you're working for a toxic company and toxic leadership. All right, let's talk about our personal lives, because in our personal lives, this can be really tricky. We have family, we have friends, we don't want to hurt their feelings, we do want to spend time with them. I used to have a really hard time saying no unless I already had something on my calendar. Here's what somebody told me one time, and I have lived by this forevermore, and it's been super helpful. We never schedule on our calendars downtime. It's usually when there isn't something going on in our calendars that we kind of take that downtime. So if you're constantly saying yes to things just because you've checked your calendar and you don't have an immediate conflict, it's okay to say no even if your calendar is empty, because your calendar is empty because you may have mentally planned downtime. Oh, on Saturday morning, I'm just going to relax, chill out by myself. I'm going to curl up and read a book. That's my go-to, to just kind of decompress and reset and rejuvenate for the week. And you don't need to explain why you can't attend. And this is a trap that I fell into all the time, because I would think, I can't really explain because I don't have anything on my calendar, and it feels very rude to say, actually, I'd rather curl up and read a book than spend time with you. So here's what I actually like to say instead. That's not really my thing, or that doesn't feel like something that I want to do at that time, but I really love to spend time with you. How about we blah, blah, blah instead next week? And this way you protect your time and the things that you want to do. You show them that they're important to you, that it's the thing that you don't want to do at that particular moment in time. It's whether it's an activity you don't enjoy, or you've just been going and you want to break. You signal very clearly that the person is important to you. The activity at that moment in time isn't. And that is the tip. That's my number one tip for how I strengthen relationships and say no in a very clear way. Let's help each other out. If you have a great phrase that I didn't mention, I would really love to add to my back pocket additional phrases, and I'm sure anybody who has made it this far in this video would also appreciate that. So pop your phrases down in the comments, and remember, be brave, take care, and stay true to yourself. I'll see you later. Bye.